My name is Joan Lurie, and I was born on April the 16th, 1939, at the Queen Victoria Maternity Home in Johannesburg, South Africa. My father, Sonny Isidore Dine, born in 1906, died in 1962. My mother, Sylvia Barelowitz Dine, born 12th of August 1915, died 4th of June 1995. I remember going to 3 kindergartens, 2 in houses, 1 at the Sydenham Highlands North Shore. I'm 5 years old. I loved this dress. It was knitted. One year when I was 10, I went with my aunt and my cousin to the Victoria Falls by train. This was when it was still very primitive, but oh my gosh, it's the most beautiful falls in the world. We would go from this little hotel and wait for a kind of vehicle that went on rails, and 5 or 6 Africans would push us and we would pay like 3 cents. One day, 2 American tourists came and they thought this was terrible. Of course, being South Africans and this being Rhodesia, we didn't see anything wrong with it. It was a way of getting us from the hotel, provided by the hotel, to these gorgeous waterfalls. There were a lot of baboons there. They came because there were tables outside where you could have something to eat or drink, and they had bowls of sugar. And these baboons loved the sugar. And one day a baboon tugged on my skirt. I've never been so scared in my life. I couldn't move. I was scared to touch it. Eventually people shooed it away. My big fear that it would take my skirt off, because I was just a little girl. When I was younger, I took all sorts of lessons: drama, elocution, dance, tennis, swimming. I played netball, I played field hockey. We had a tennis court at our house. My grandfather on my father's side, Samuel Dine, when he was in London, he was on the Yiddish stage. And there's always been this love for drama and plays in our family, singing and all that. When we came to Shreveport, we volunteered at the Strand, the Shreveport Little Theatre, the opera, the symphony, the ballet, and all the theatres. Some of them have closed down, some have reopened. There are lots of theatres here. And this is work that we really enjoy. I wanted to tell you about the holidays that I spent in Rhodesia when I was little, in Mashaba. Mashaba was just a little country store, nothing like anything in America. It was on an asbestos mine, and my uncle ran it. His wife was my mother's twin sister. There was no running water, there was no indoor plumbing. We used to shower like a little room and then just throw buckets of water over themselves. They also had this wonderful oven, which was a clay semicircular oven, like a dome, and they could bake. It was outside. They could bake the most incredible cookies and cakes. Without knowing the temperature, they just learned. The shop itself was across a piece of dirt. I spent the whole time in fear because going to the outside privy, you never knew if the chickens were there or a snake or a lizard or what kind of animal. And my aunt would send me across to call my uncle for lunch, and I would just close my eyes and run. It had a veranda, and on the veranda there were 2 African men with pedal sewing machines. And these men, I didn't realize then how wonderful it was. They could make anything you wanted, any type of clothing. Later on, I started sewing, and I sewed for years for my 3 daughters and for myself. All our clothes, our jackets, our pants, our dresses, shorts, everything I sewed. And then I started appreciating these tailors. The food, like the rice and the beans, was sold in great big sacks, and then they would measure out. It was a very small store, but it had fabric and food because it served all the Africans who were working on the asbestos mine. I have 2 brothers, Stanley Rodney, who was about 4 years younger than me, born in 1943 in February, and Edwin Richard, born in the end of August 1945. Edwin had cerebral palsy, and he lives now in a home in Johannesburg, and Stanley lives in Sydney, Australia. I spent 5 years at the Fairmount Primary School, 1 year in Standard 5 at Saxonwold Primary, and Form 1 to 5, that's 5 years at Parktown Girls High. I matriculated in 1956, went to the University of Cape Town in 1956 to 1959. I was 17 years old when I went. I got a Bachelor of Arts, came back to Johannesburg for 1 year at Teachers College in 1960, and I got my high school diploma for teaching. I met Aubrey the first time in December 1956. I just matriculated. We were at a party next door. I was 17 and he was a medical student, 20 years old. 3 years later, I was waiting for a bus in Sea Point, Cape Town, and was given a ride to the beach. It was his car. We married a year later on the 4th of January 1961 at the Walmerens Street Shul, where my father's father had been a founding member and where everyone knew the Dine family. I taught for 1 year at Parktown Girls High, the school I had gone to. Our daughter Tracy was born on June the 13th, 1962. We were living in our second flat, this one in Bellevue. When she was 2 months old, my father died of lung cancer. She was 9 months when we bought a house in Emmarentia. Stephen was born on April the 22nd, 1966. Aubrey was in Cape Town writing the pathology exam. That was the big exam. Nadine was born November the 6th, 1967. When she was 5 months old, Aubrey went to do a fellowship in Oxford, England. 6 weeks later, we followed. I came with 3 children, stopping at the old, horrible airport in Entebbe, Uganda. We spent 1 year in Headington, Oxford, with some help from Mrs. Armand and 2 wonderful neighbours, the Websters. From 1968 to 1969, and we came home via Israel. When we got back to Johannesburg, we made the house bigger. And then Bernice was born on July the 18th, 1971. Tracy was 16, Stephen was 12, Nadine was 10, and Bernice 7 when we emigrated to Mountain Brook, Birmingham, Alabama. In my mind, a completely another planet. South Africa was our homeland, but apartheid was getting out of hand. Too many awful laws. The killing of Steve Biko and Sharpsville, and the ongoing war on the border, aided by China and Russia, was too much for us. We wanted out for our children's sake. The threat of bannings, jailings, and the fear of talking about the horrors made it very hard to live there anymore. We saw no end to the rule of the Afrikaner nationalists. We left behind our beloved family and friends, and it was a struggle to adjust to the USA, their priorities and customs, especially being in the Deep South. I feel now that it was worth it for my children, but for me, I wish I had never had to do it. When I was a child, I spent winter holidays in Mashaba or Bulawayo, Rhodesia, with my mother's twin sister. Or Durban in the summer, we went to Muizenberg, where my maternal grandmother lived. I have fond memories of sea and sun and fun and cousins. After I married, we went to Salisbury, to Aubrey's sister, that is in Rhodesia. His sister Lily, we went there twice. And they had a house in Muizenberg. And those were wonderful holidays. We came to Mountain Brook. And for 8 great years, 3 children finished school. For 6 months, Aubrey went to Dallas. I went to Dallas eventually with Bernice, and the other children went to college. Well, Tracy had already finished. Bernice went to high school in Dallas, and after 1 year, we moved house when he lost his job. And a year later, he went to Shreveport for a year and left Bernice and I in Dallas. And it wasn't really easy, but it had to be. Tracy went to the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. She went to Massachusetts for a year, then Tulane, and finally to Emory, and summers at many colleges. Stephen went to the University of Pennsylvania. He went to Stanford. He worked in Washington for senators and congressmen, then to Harvard Law School. Nadine went to Tulane and the University of Alabama in Dallas, Texas in Dallas, and then the University of Texas in Austin. Then she went to live in San Francisco. Bernice went to University of Texas in Austin. She went to PT school in Florida, and then she went to live in Atlanta. Actually, they kept moving all over the USA. I insisted that they all did music, sport, and well at school, and they did. I worked part-time for 13 years in fabric stores and a variety store in Birmingham, Dallas, and Shreveport. so that I had, well, $2.15 was the hourly pay, that I had enough money so that I could send 3 of them for a 6-week stint in Israel. Then for 20 years I worked as a special ed aide in Shreveport at the Shreve Island Elementary. Now I can tell you something about the family. My dad had 2 brothers, Nathan, who ended up in Sydney, and Lulu in Port Elizabeth, 2 sisters, Beatty, who ended up in Melbourne, Australia, and Jenny in Johannesburg. My grandfather had a factory that manufactured boxes made of cardboard, egg fillers, which were made of cardboard in those days, and did printing. He worked there. It had been his father's factory, and they got an order from Australia that was bigger than a whole year of orders in Johannesburg. So he sent his oldest son and his oldest daughter and her husband and 2 children to Australia to see what it was all about, and they stayed there. My mother had sisters, Bella, who lived in Muizenberg, Anne in Kenilworth, Cape Town, Ralph in Johannesburg, Philip, he was an architect, he stuttered, and he lived in Johannesburg. He was a gay man. Lily, who was her twin, lived in Mashaba and Bulawayo in Rhodesia, which today is Zimbabwe. My maternal grandmother, Tilly Devora her name was Tiber Devora, Rom, married a Borelowitz. She was one of the children of my great-grandmother, whose name was, her last name was Chesrick, and she was an only child. They came from Valkamir in Lithuania. My great-grandmother is buried in Maitland number 8 Rowland Street Cemetery in Cape Town. My great-grandfather was Wolf Velvel Rom. He came to South Africa in 1880. He was a blacksmith and died in 1904. None of them could read or write English. My grandfather, Israel Borelowitz, was a farmer from Chelm, Lithuania, and had a farm in Keetmanshoop in the Cape. He was a farmer. My great-grandfather, Beryl Borelowitz, also was a blacksmith, came from Chelm, Lithuania. He went to South America, Israel, to get horses for Cecil John Rhodes of the Rhodes Scholarship. From that he started Anglo-American, the De Beers Diamonds, and this was during the Boer War, when the Cape was on the British side. He was rewarded by being made a burgher or a citizen of the Cape, and was allowed to bring in 10 members of the family from Lithuania to Cape Town. So a lot of people in Cape Town are related through the Rom Borelowitz family. They're related to me. My paternal grandmother, Rebecca Dombrowski, came from Poland. She had 2 sisters and a brother. Her sister Rachel married my grandfather Samuel Dine's brother. I have a picture of her sister Yetta's wedding. Samuel came from Odessa, Ukraine. He decided to leave Odessa when he found out that he was going to be put in the Russian army, which was not a good thing for a Jew. So the Hayes helped him to get to London. And there he met my grandmother Rebecca and married her in London in 1894. His father was David Dine and his mother was Vera Dine. I cannot find out anything else about them because everything was lost when Ukraine became communist. My grandmother Tilly had a sister, Ada Averbach, who lived in Cape Town, Betsy Zinn in Southwest Africa, and she died in 1918 in the flu epidemic. And Chaya Fredel, who married a man, Egnal, and went to live in Philadelphia, and I've never been able to get hold of them. She had brothers. There was Nathan Rom in Pretoria, Harry Rom in Port Elizabeth, Dave in Cape Town, and Rafe in Bethlehem and Durban. My grandfather on my mother's side, her father had a sister-in-law, Shana Nissen, who married his brother. They were from Chelm, and her husband was killed in the pogrom by the Russians, murdered more likely. She was brought to Cape Town in 1912 to look after my grandmother's children, and I am named for her. She died in 1938 because my Hebrew name is Shana or Yafa, and her name was Shana. I have the grave numbers. I don't know if anyone will go to South Africa. My father, Sonny, is in West Park, number H561. My mother, Sylvia, is in West Park, number U3919. Tilly, who was born in 1881, died in 1961, is in Cape Town. Israel, born 1874, died 1939, is in Cape Town. Sarah Dombrowski, died 23rd of February 1921, Braamfontein Cemetery, Johannesburg. Isaac Dombrowski died March 9, 1920 in Brixton, Johannesburg is the cemetery. Samuel died, my grandfather, 1868 to 1940, number 5736 Brixton. Rebecca died in 1941, number 5575 in Brixton.
Okay, I'm Aubrey Lurie. You've just heard a beautiful, detailed, well-planned explanation from Joan. I haven't done the same. I'm going to be scattering around from one subject to the other. I was born in Johannesburg in 1936, October the 31st, which is Halloween Day. We didn't know that when we were in South Africa, but I was very impressed when we got to America. Everybody celebrated my birthday. At any rate, my parents, their names were Morris or Machel Lurie and Chana Fella. They both came from Lithuania, from a little town called Pumpian, or in Lithuanian it was Pumpanai, and they might have been distantly related, as most families were in those days. We actually did a trip to their homeland village in about 2000, and we saw the house my father had lived in because it was right next to the church of the village, and my grandmother used to tell me stories of how they would help the farmers coming to the church on a Sunday, who came in their wagons and parked on the square in front of the church, and allow the farmers to come into their house to refresh before they went to church. So we could identify the house, and when we visited the little town, there were no vestiges of any Jews having lived there, but we did identify the town. We actually came across a lady working in the church who had a scarf over her head, a Lithuanian lady, and she pointed out some of the Jewish areas of that little town, such as where the cemetery was, where the mikveh was, or where the synagogue was. Neither of those two structures are standing. She also pointed out to us a house where the Jews had been rounded up into in 1942 or so, when the Germans came in and were then taken to the nearby forest and exterminated. Both my parents came from the same shtetl, and it was interesting when we were walking around, I could hear in the wind, I could hear some Yiddish being spoken, as if they were still there. Just stop for a while. My father's father was a sheched, which is the individual who slaughtered the meat in a kosher fashion to be eaten by the Jews in the village. In other words, he slaughtered the chickens as well as cows and animals of that type. It was a very tough life. The community was, even though it was small, they were not unified. They were divided between different sects, and some of the other sects wouldn't eat the meat that he had prepared for them because of rivalries. He was a follower of the Vilna Gaon, he was a famous rabbi in a town called Vilna or Vilnius. They were not Hasidic, they were part of the Mishnah movement of Jews who believed that it was important to be not only religious but to be educated and to practice your religion from a point of view of education rather than blind faith. My father's family, there were 4 of them, 3 brothers and 1 sister. My mother's family came from the same shtetl. Her father had been a merchant and actually had done quite well. I think he even had a mill, if I'm not mistaken. And my mother used to work in his business because he needed help. They were a big family. There were 12 or 13 children, and she did not stay home to help the children. She went to help her father in the business. And they were a little more comfortably off than my father's family. During the First World War, they were evacuated out of their shtetl. My father's family went to Western Russia. My mother's family were put on a train and taken right across Russia to Siberia, where they spent a couple of the war years in 1914 to 18 war. They went back after the war to the village and re-established their lives there. My father's father died when he was the oldest, my father's father died when he was about 12, so he did not really have a bar mitzvah because there was nobody to supervise that, and he had to go out and earn a living to support the family. And he did that by bartering and in getting involved in various fur industry and various buying and selling to try and raise some money for the family. But they were not well off at all. In 1925, he decided the future was not in Lithuania. He didn't care for the communist regimes. He didn't care for being in the army, and he'd heard good reports of Jews migrating to America, and so the ultimate aim was to get to America. He couldn't get the visa because just before he was due to get it, the American Congress came out with a limiting immigration policy, and they did not increase the immigration of Eastern Europeans, particularly Jews, to come to America. He had hoped to get to this country and was just about to get his visa. So he went to an alternate avenue of migration. The British Empire had welcomed immigrants to their colonies, such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa and Rhodesia and so on. And people had been out and said that South Africa was an opportunistic country and he should get to South Africa. He did this in 1925. He went through London. He sailed out of Riga in Latvia, went to London. They were helped by the American Jewish Helping Hand Society and taken down to the port of Southampton, where they were put on a boat which took them to South Africa. My father was about 18 at the time. He shared a cabin with, I think, 6 or 8 other young guys. All of them became millionaires except my father. And when I asked him why, he said, well, he decided to be an honest businessman. So much for his sense. He came to Cape Town. They all came to Cape Town, but they were encouraged not to stay in Cape Town, but to go inland to where the diamond and gold mines were, because there were more opportunities for immigrants in that area. So he went first to the town of Johannesburg and a neighboring town called Germiston. He worked for a year in a store and then decided to go and open his own business, which he did in a town called Costa, away from Johannesburg. And he brought, in the meantime, was bringing out his mother and his sister, his girlfriend, my mother, and his brothers and his sister, and they all, he brought them all out, and he set up his brothers in business with him, and they opened up general merchandise. They opened up stores in Costa, in Zeerust, another little town, in Potchefstroom and Klerksdorp, and he put his cousins in those. There were, it was called Lurie Brothers and Company, but there were also another cousin family called Kramers, the Kramer family, of which there were 2 sons, Max and Izzy, and he set those people up in his business as well. So Lurie Brothers and Company had its main office in Johannesburg eventually, but they had branches in Potchefstroom, Klerksdorp, Zeerust, and Costa. The Costa company was sold to cousins of my mother, brothers of my mother, the Feller family, and they bought the company in Costa and did pretty well out of that. Let's see. Then my father and mother got married and started having children. There are 4 of us, and my elder sister Lily, then Marge, then myself, and my younger sister Rhoda. My parents did pretty well in their business. It was an importing business, manufacturing, clothing as well, and they serviced really the Jewish population of Johannesburg, who were, because the goods they carried were of a better quality. They imported from France, from Italy, from Israel, from Spain, and also from the Far East,
and US,
and also from America. And my parents came on several business trips after the Second World War in 1947 and 48, and so on, to do business in New York, which they did quite successfully. Our own family, we lived in a suburb called Bellevue, which was a very nice house, nothing very posh, but nice and accommodating. We also housed my father's mother, his name was Matla, who lived with us as well as her other children in Johannesburg. I was the first in the family to go to college. I went to the University of Witwatersrand into the medical school in 1953 and graduated as a physician in 1959. I then did my internships and then decided to try and see what goes on in the lab, to which we sent specimens every day. I liked the lab side of medical work very much and decided to stay and become a pathologist, which I graduated in 1966, after which I went on a fellowship to Oxford in England to learn about blood clotting and bleeding problems. We spent a very nice year there, as Joan mentioned. We had 3 children at the time, and we really enjoyed our time in Britain. It wasn't easy with 3 kids, nobody to help us, but we had some very good friends and a very nice helping person to help Joan with the children. We came back to South Africa in 1968, and I stayed at the Pathology Institute for another 5 years or so. I couldn't survive on the salary they paid, so I decided to venture out into practice as a pathologist. I couldn't join the existing practices and started my own as a consequence with the help of my father's finances, and we got going, and I was in that for 5 years. It was a terrible struggle, but we managed to survive, and were just coming right when our papers to emigrate to America came through, which we had to take up within 3 months or lose it forever and ever. So I came to America to organize a job. I had also been to Australia to register as a physician in Australia before South Africa was thrown out of or left the British Commonwealth. But we got our papers through the help of my sister, who was already a citizen in the United States. We got our papers to immigrate, and I found a job in Birmingham, Alabama, and we made our move to Birmingham, lock, stock and barrel. We brought all our furniture. We had some money stashed away in America. We bought a house. Most of that money was stashed by my mother, but we bought a house in Birmingham, got a job there, and we were there for 8 years, which was very nice. It helped us settle into America. And then I ventured out into another venture in Dallas, which didn't work out very successfully. I was there for a year, and I finally had to find a job, which we did in Shreveport, and we've been here since 1988. That's almost 30 years. And Shreveport's been very good to us. It's a lovely little city, and I work at the Veterans Administration Hospital. As a pathologist trainee and also as a qualified pathologist, I was 15 years at an institution in Johannesburg. Our family, Tracy, was the great joy of our life. She was an absolutely fantastic person. She collected degrees from colleges like she was a thermometer from the University of Alabama. Then she went to University of Massachusetts, and she also did some courses in Atlanta. She was independent. She was a very capable, intelligent, beautiful woman who got married. In fact, the anniversary of her wedding is tomorrow, the 26th of June. She married a lovely guy from Shreveport. They had 2 children, but things didn't work out very well, and unfortunately Tracy passed away in 2008. Right. She had 2 children. Next is Stephen, who did very well at school, very well at colleges, and graduated as a lawyer out of Harvard, but decided that lawyer wasn't his field, and he'd rather be in venture capitalistic type of activities. He went to Microsoft for a couple of for a few months or a couple of years.
6 years.
6 years in Microsoft. And then ventured out of Seattle down to Silicon Valley and has tried to make it as a venture capitalist there. He has 2 children, beautiful kids. Next is Nadine. Nadine's a character. She's she's a very capable individual. She has 2 children. She went to colleges as well. Eventually got a degree out of the University of Texas in communication.
Advertising.
In advertising, communication, advertising. And she tried to get a job in LA, in San Francisco, but that didn't pan out. So she does odd jobs. She's a very capable person,
She worked
and
for
wherever
the
she,
hospital for a long
she
time.
worked at the AIDS program at the University of San Francisco in hospital in the AIDS program. She had also worked in New Orleans in the AIDS program there, organizing their office.
Juvenile
and
justice.
affairs.
New Orleans in the juvenile justice.
Okay, I'm being corrected. The youngest is Bernice. Bernice is a physical therapist. She graduated at the University of Florida, and first out of Texas. Then she did
Northwest.
she did her physical therapy out of Northwest in Florida, and she's works as a physical therapist in Atlanta.
For
She's
19
married,
years.
and she's got 2 beautiful kids as well. Okay, I think we can take a break for a minute.
Tell the names of your grandchildren.
You'll tell them.
Then I want to mention my grandchildren because they are what it's all about. They are the joy of my life. And this hard emigration that we went through is worth every penny, every minute because of them. I have Tracy's children, Emily and Matthew Sklar. Then there's Stephen's 2 little boys, Seth and Ben Lurie. Nadine's 2 boys, Raphael and Gideon Bhatia. And then there's Bernice's 2 little boys, that's Nathan and Kobe.